Based on the research that you guys have, do you have some sort of leading changes that people can make in their lives, like ones that are most commonly identified areas to improve?
Certainly, and there, as I mentioned, there are a lot of things that are very intuitive, right? Getting the right amount of sleep, right? Eating a nutritious diet. Those things are things you probably already know. There's some interesting things that we found out that maybe go against some of those classical assumptions. One of the things we've seen is in a lot of our professional and Olympic athletes, they tend to have significantly worse aging than we would anticipate, right? And that might be because they're exercising too much, putting their body under too much stress, which I think has been an interesting finding. Some of the other things that we really have found that have been, surprising to us is the impact of stress. Stress and the ability to even regulate your emotions can actually play a major difference in your aging process. And so that's one of the things we always try and target, and it works for everyone. If people can reduce their levels of perceived stress, so even just the stress you're feeling on a day-to-day basis that you score yourself, it's something that's completely subjective. It can make a major impact to these aging rates. Those are things I think we always found a little bit surprising. Is that there's a sweet spot for generally now everything. You don't want to overdo anything, you don't want to underdo everything. Moderation is key, but there are also some interventional things that we find that have some really good correlations. And one of the best ones tends to be fasting. Caloric restriction, and that's been one of the, I would say, most well validated therapies for interventions across most mammal species. But whenever we see people reduce their calories, their rates of aging can decrease. And we would anticipate that this would lead to obviously all of those other effects, like improved muscle mass, improved balance, improved mental processing, and even the facial aging. And so caloric restriction, although it might not be fun, is a process that definitively works across the board.
I think there's been some studies done also on intermittent fasting or intermittent mimicking fasting, which also has a similar anti-aging effect. I guess it's putting the body under stress so that it has to adapt and, sort of survive.
Exactly. And then, there are a lot of theories on why that might happen. This process of autophagy, where your body sort of is able to eat itself. It's a little bit like spring cleaning, right? Where your body's able to, repurpose a lot of the things that your body has created already and make it more efficient. And so autophagy is, one of those processes that might mitigate some of the effects we're seeing, with that life extension and caloric restriction. And so that's one area. But even things that you're probably doing in your clinic already, right? Doing things like, optimal hormonal maintenance, doing things like, making sure that people are sensitive to insulin or have low BMIs. Like those are things that are all going to affect this marker and help you keep it as low as possible for as long as possible.
Yeah, we drive a lot of health based on body fat percentage because we think that weight is such a poor metric for measuring health. Back to your professional athletes, in terms of aging faster, I was at a conference and there was someone giving a lecture that said athletes from a hormonal perspective often are like bright stars. They burn bright very fast, but they burn out very fast. And there's a significant, hormonal decline, which is much greater than the average person. So they have really high, great hormone levels when they're young, which allows them to compete at a very high level. But then their levels decline faster, and then they get into poor health. And you can see how many former professional athletes end up being very out of shape.
Exactly. And you see this even with, obviously the sex hormones that we all talk about all the time, but even things like adrenal hormones, right? With, some of those stress hormones we mentioned, right? Like cortisol. Yeah. And it's the exact same. And we already talked about the impact of stress, right? Stress, even emotional stress, but even physical stress, right, can deplete some of those hormones, get you a little bit out of balance, which is why it's so important to test those. One of the biggest issues currently with these epigenetic ages can absolutely tell you where you're at with the biggest risk factor, but it doesn't necessarily always tell you what's driving that for you. Right. So for these athletes, we might say, hey, it's probably, some of this, this high levels of stress. It might be reactive oxygen species. It might be these hormone, changes. But we're not really able to point to a specific reason. And that's why you have to view it in a larger medical context. You can say, hey, this is the biggest risk factor and this is what we want to manage. But there are probably other things specific to you as an individual that might be driving that process. And so it is still an integrative health approach. It's another piece of general medical care, but it's a very, very important and very big I would say process that you want to fix and resolve.
Perfect. Listen, thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you on another one.